It was early 1944, and I was stationed in a small village in Ukraine. The Eastern Front had become a relentless grind, and we were holding our positions as best as we could. I was an SS soldier, and the daily routine of fortifying our defenses and preparing for the inevitable Soviet counterattacks had become a part of life. The village was a shadow of its former self. What once had been a peaceful place was now a battlefield, scarred by the conflict that surrounded us. The houses were damaged, and the streets were filled with rubble. The locals had long since fled, leaving behind their homes, their lives, and the remnants of their past. Our days were marked by the constant threat of Soviet attacks. Each morning, we would inspect our defenses, checking the barbed wire, the trenches, and the bunkers we had dug into the earth. Our nights were filled with the sounds of distant artillery, the hum of aircraft overhead, and the occasional burst of gunfire from skirmishes on the outskirts. One particularly cold morning, as the frost clung to the trees and the air was crisp and biting, we received word that the Soviets were preparing a major offensive. The news was a jolt to our weary unit. We knew what was coming, and the tension was palpable. The attack began just before dawn. The Soviet artillery rained down on us, their shells exploding with a deafening roar. The ground shook beneath us, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of smoke and burning. We scrambled to our positions, our hearts pounding as we braced ourselves for the onslaught. As the artillery barrage subsided, the Soviet infantry advanced. Their numbers were overwhelming, and they came at us in waves. We opened fire, our machine guns chattering and rifles cracking. The noise was deafening, and the chaos of battle enveloped us. I could see my comrades fighting bravely, their faces determined despite the fear and exhaustion that showed in their eyes. The Soviets pressed forward relentlessly. They had tanks and armored vehicles that rumbled across the battlefield, their guns belching fire as they targeted our positions. We fought back with everything we had, but it felt like we were being pushed back inch by inch. The battle was fierce and unforgiving, and every step forward was contested with bloody resistance. In the midst of the fighting, I was ordered to help reinforce a weak point in our line. I grabbed my gear and moved out, ducking behind cover and making my way to where the fighting was heaviest. The ground was churned up from the constant bombardment, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. When I reached the position, I saw that it was barely holding. The enemy was closing in, and we needed to hold the line or risk being overrun. I joined my fellow soldiers in digging in, setting up barricades, and preparing for the inevitable close-quarters combat. The Soviet forces were relentless, and they attacked with a ferocity that left little room for error. The fighting was intense. We were surrounded on all sides, and it felt like the Soviets were everywhere. The battle became a desperate struggle for survival. I remember the fear and adrenaline, the constant need to stay alert and keep fighting. My comrades were injured, some of them falling right beside me. Each loss was a blow, but we had to keep going. As the day wore on, it became clear that the Soviets were making significant gains. We were forced to retreat, pulling back through the village and trying to regroup. The retreat was chaotic, and we had to move quickly to avoid being cut off. The once familiar village was now a maze of destruction, and it was hard to tell where we had been and where we were going. By nightfall, we had pulled back to a new defensive position, still reeling from the intensity of the day's fighting. We were exhausted, our uniforms torn and dirty, and our faces streaked with sweat and grime. The battle had been costly, and the toll on our unit was evident. As I sat in the darkness, the sounds of the battlefield fading into the distance, I thought about the comrades we had lost and the challenges that lay ahead. The Eastern Front was a place of constant struggle, where every day was a fight for survival. Despite the hardships, we had to press on, driven by the belief that we could turn the tide and hold our ground. The war was far from over, and we knew that the battles would continue. But in that moment, we took solace in the fact that we had fought with everything we had, even as the conflict raged around us. The memories of the battle would stay with us, a reminder of the harsh realities of war and the strength we found in each other amidst the chaos